the most evil female killers in Georgia, full list and shocking crimes. Welcome back to Justice Reversed, where real crimes meet real justice. Number 1. Rebecca Sears. They say betrayal can be silent, living next door, smiling, sharing secrets. But in one Georgia neighborhood, that trust would turn into one of the most brutal crimes the state had ever seen. Rebecca Bowers Sears was 41 when her lifelong friendship with Laverne K. Parsons ended in unimaginable violence. The two women were neighbors, co-workers at a physical therapy clinic, and by all appearances, close friends. But beneath that bond was a secret. Rebecca was having an affair with Kay's husband, David Parsons. When the affair ended, prosecutors said Rebecca decided that if she could not have David, she would remove the one person standing in her way. On the morning of March 25, 2009, Kay Parsons returned home after dropping her son off at school. Waiting inside was Christopher Bowers, Rebecca's own son, lying in ambush. Armed with a hammer and a baseball bat from the garage, he unleashed a savage assault. A handyman discovered Kay barely clinging to life, beaten so severely that Columbia County's district attorney later described the case as one of the grisliest murders I have ever seen. Kay died the following day in the hospital. To cover their tracks, Rebecca reported a staged burglary at her own home and even arranged a bizarre shooting incident days later, where Christopher accidentally wounded her in the leg. Investigators saw through the lies. David Parsons admitted the affair, and soon Rebecca herself told police that Christopher had taken care of everything, even confessing to disposing of his bloody clothes. The Columbia County grand jury indicted both Rebecca and Christopher on charges of malice murder, felony murder, armed robbery, and burglary. At first, both pleaded not guilty. Rebecca's attorney, Victor Hawk, insisted the state hasn't presented real evidence tying her to the killing. Her family also defended her innocence. But the turning point came when Rebecca, facing the death penalty, directed police to her son's blood-soaked clothing. DNA testing left no doubt. In May 2012, Rebecca Sears pleaded guilty to murder, armed robbery, and burglary. Her son soon followed. Both were sentenced to consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 20 years. In court, Rebecca stood emotionless, eyes lowered, her once friendly demeanor replaced by the weight of irreversible choices. The case shocked the community and drew wide discussion online. Neighbors who once described Rebecca as kind and trustworthy struggled to reconcile that image with the mastermind of a premeditated killing. Kay's family, shattered by grief, avoided public comment, while prosecutors emphasized that plea deals spared them the torment of trial. From this tragedy, 3 warnings remain clear. First, betrayal often begins in secrecy. Infidelity can ignite destructive choices. Second, manipulation of family members, especially children, into violence is a devastating reality. Third, never overlook signs of obsession or escalating lies in close relationships. They can precede deadly consequences. In the end, the Parsons case stands as a haunting reminder. Sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers, but from those we trust the most. Number 2. Julia Lynn Turner. In small-town Georgia, 2 men died years apart with eerily similar symptoms. What appeared to be bad luck soon revealed a deadly pattern no one could ignore. Julia Lynn Womack Turner, known simply as Lynn Turner, was a former sheriff's dispatcher born in 1968. By her late 20s, she was already living a double life, one as a wife and mother, another as a woman driven by greed and control. At 27, she poisoned her husband, Maurice Lynn Turner, a 31-year-old police officer. Just 6 years later, she poisoned her boyfriend, Randall Randy Thompson, the father of her 2 children. The timeline of deaths was disturbingly similar. On March 2, 1995, Lynn Turner sought emergency care for flu-like symptoms. The next morning, Lynn gave him green Jell-O, then left for errands. Hours later, Glenn was found dead. Doctors cited heart problems, but within 4 days, Lynn had moved in with Randy. Years later, on January 21, 2001, Randy himself grew sick with identical symptoms. On January 22, Lynn offered him Jell-O. By evening, he was dead on his couch. Again, doctors suggested heart failure. Investigators later discovered that both men had been killed with antifreeze ethylene glycol, a sweet, odorless toxin that can be disguised in food. Forensic experts proved that antifreeze mixed into Jell-O or tea looked harmless but caused organ failure within days. Prosecutors said Lynn murdered for financial gain, collecting over $150,000 from Glenn's insurance and $36,000 after Randy's death. District attorney officials described her motives as lust, greed, and murder. By 2001, suspicion had grown too strong to ignore. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation exhumed Glenn Turner's body after Randy's death, confirming the same poison in both cases. A profiler labeled Lynn a classic sociopath, explaining she relished manipulating those around her while outsmarting investigators. Glenn's family recalled his chilling warning before his death: "If anything happens to me, Lynn will be involved." Lynn's first trial in 2004 ended with a guilty verdict for Glenn's murder, earning her life in prison. In 2007, another jury convicted her of killing Randy, sentencing her to a second life term without parole. In court, Lynn appeared cold, expressionless, her face set as if carved in stone. Prosecutors highlighted the deliberation of her method, calling it cold, nasty, and deliberate. The case became one of the most notorious in Georgia's history, drawing national coverage. TV programs such as Forensic Files and Snapped featured her crimes, branding her the Black Widow. Families of both men expressed relief at her convictions, though Randy's relatives later said even Lynn's prison suicide in 2010 did not bring closure. From these events come vital warnings. First, financial desperation combined with secrecy can drive calculated betrayal. Second, unexplained illnesses in loved ones should always be taken seriously and medically investigated. Third, trust in relationships must never override patterns of deceit, especially when money and control are at stake. The Turner case forces us to ask, how well do we ever know the people closest to us, and what hidden motives may lurk behind a familiar smile? Number 3. Judith and Adam's Neelley. In the fall of 1982, a chilling story unfolded in the American South, a tale of abduction, torture, and cold-blooded murder that would make an 18-year-old woman the youngest female ever sentenced to death in the United States. Her name was Judith and Adams Neelley, born in 1964. By the time she turned 18, she was already married to Alvin Neelley, a man nearly a decade older who dragged her into a life of crime. Together, they committed robberies, firebombings, and worse. But their most notorious acts began on September 25, 1982, when they spotted 13-year-old Lisa and Milliken at a mall in Rome, Georgia. Judith lured Lisa into their car, pretending to befriend her. What followed was unspeakable. Lisa was taken to a motel in Scottsboro, Alabama, where she was raped repeatedly by both Judith and Alvin. Over the course of days, Judith injected the child with drain cleaner 6 times in her arms, legs, and neck in a failed attempt to poison her. When Lisa clung to life, Judith pressed a gun to her back and fired. Then she pushed her body into the Little River Canyon. Chillingly, Judith herself phoned police to report the body's location, as if taunting them. Only a week later, the Neelleys abducted another couple, Janice Chapman and her fiancé John Hancock. John was shot in the back but survived. Janice was not as fortunate. She was tortured, then shot 3 times. Her life ended in the same cold fashion as Lisa's. Judith was arrested on October 9, 1982. Alvin followed days later. At trial in 1983, Judith admitted nearly every detail but claimed she acted under Alvin's control, a victim of what her defense called battered woman syndrome. The jury convicted her of capital murder for Lisa Milliken's death. Though they recommended life without parole by a 10-2 vote, Judge Randall Cole overrode their decision and sentenced her to death, calling the crime especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. She became the youngest woman on death row. For years, appeals failed. In 1999, days before her scheduled execution, Alabama Governor Fob James commuted her sentence to life imprisonment, citing the jury's original recommendation. The decision sparked outrage. In 2003, lawmakers even passed a statute aimed at making her ineligible for parole, though courts later struck it down as unconstitutional. Parole hearings in 2018 and 2023 reignited pain for the families. At the most recent, Janice Chapman's daughter called Judith a monster who doesn't deserve freedom, while Governor Kay Ivey firmly opposed her release. No supporters attended on Judith's behalf. From this case, 3 warnings emerge. First, manipulation within intimate relationships can breed unimaginable crimes. Second, predators often exploit trust, making vigilance essential. Third, the scars left on victims' families never fade, long after trials end. The story of Judith Neelley lingers as a stark reminder: evil can wear a familiar face, and sometimes the greatest cruelty is inflicted not for survival, but for sport. Number 4. Meriel Bemis. It began with an argument behind closed doors, but within hours, the quiet of a Georgia apartment complex was shattered by an unthinkable act that left even seasoned prosecutors shaken. Meriel Bemis was only 21 years old when she committed a crime that would define her life forever. Living in DeKalb County, Georgia, she was raising her 3-year-old daughter, Lela. Friends described her as a young mother under pressure, but prosecutors later revealed another reality: a woman consumed by anger and desperation after her relationship collapsed. On February 23, 2014, Meriel had a heated fight with her boyfriend, Troy Walker. The argument ended with Walker leaving her apartment, breaking off the relationship. What followed stunned the community. Within moments of his departure, prosecutors said Meriel suffocated her toddler with a pillow. Shortly afterward, she called Walker and admitted what she had done. When Walker returned, he found little Lela unresponsive in the bathroom. He tried desperately to revive her, performing CPR, before calling 911. Authorities arrived around 11:30 p.m. and rushed Lela to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at Eggleston. Doctors confirmed the worst: Lela was already gone. The autopsy revealed she had died from suffocation. Meriel Bemis was arrested the next day. Police charged her with murder, and Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Dahlia Racine described the act as robbing a child of life in such a vicious way. At first, investigators were cautious in releasing details, but as the autopsy confirmed suffocation, the picture became tragically clear. On September 11, 2014, standing in a Stone Mountain courtroom, Meriel pleaded guilty. By doing so, she avoided a lengthy trial but accepted responsibility for her actions. Judges and prosecutors alike noted the gravity of the crime. She assumed some level of responsibility by pleading guilty, ADA Racine said, but the crime itself was malicious. Meriel was sentenced to life in prison, showing no outward emotion as the words were spoken. Dressed in prison attire, her shoulders slumped, she stared downward, avoiding the gaze of those in attendance. The case drew immediate reactions. Locally, parents and neighbors expressed disbelief. "It's something you can't process," one resident told reporters, a mother turning on her child. The story also gained attention nationally, with commentators pointing to the dangers of untreated emotional instability and the fragile line between anger and irreversible violence. From this tragedy, lessons emerge that cannot be ignored. First, arguments in relationships should never escalate unchecked. Seek support before emotions spiral into destructive actions. Second, loved ones must remain vigilant for warning signs of instability or threats to a child's safety. Third, communities must treat domestic disputes with urgency, recognizing the potential danger that follows heated breakups. The story of Meriel and Lela Bemis leaves a haunting mark. Love distorted by rage can destroy the very bond it is meant to protect. And behind the steel gates of a Georgia prison, one mother lives every day with the silence of the daughter she silenced forever. Number 5. Ebony Passion Smith. A marriage that began with vows of love ended in a hail of gunfire, leaving a decorated Air Force mechanic dead and a Georgia community struggling to understand how family turned fatal. Ebony Passion Smith, born in 1979, was 32 years old when she shot her husband, Brian Smith, inside their Warner Robins home. Brian, just 30, was a respected C-130 aircraft mechanic at Robins Air Force Base. They had been married 4 years and shared a young daughter. To neighbors, they looked like a typical military family, but prosecutors would later argue that Ebony's resentment, jealousy, and fear of losing custody exploded into violence. On July 15, 2011, the day began with divorce papers. Hours later, Ebony, distressed and fearful, took handfuls of pills, telling police she contemplated suicide. When Brian returned without their daughter, Ebony demanded to know her whereabouts. Under the haze of medication and emotion, she retrieved his .40 caliber handgun from a dresser drawer. One bullet went into the wall. The rest went into Brian. Investigators documented 9 entry wounds: chest, abdomen, arm, leg, and hand. The magazine, once holding 13 rounds, was emptied before Ebony collapsed under blankets in the bedroom. At 5:59 p.m., police arrived to find Brian dead in the hallway bathroom and Ebony lethargic, surrounded by empty pill bottles. The brutality stunned prosecutors. Houston County District Attorney officials charged her with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and firearms violations. The trial in August 2013 revealed details of the marriage. Ebony accused Brian of cheating, claimed he slapped and shoved her, and testified that she planned to end her own life, not his. Yet prosecutors argued she was lying in wait. This was not sudden passion, Assistant DA Elizabeth Racine told the jury. This was the intent. On August 7, 2013, a Houston County jury convicted her of malice murder. The next day, she stood motionless in court as the judge pronounced life in prison with the possibility of parole. Shoulders slumped, face unreadable, Ebony avoided eye contact with Brian's grieving family, who filled the courtroom. Brian's mother, Sandra Smith, described her son as her refuge after her husband's death. His brother Marcus, who discovered the body, spoke of paranoia and panic attacks that still haunted him. Their 4-year-old daughter cried in her sleep for her father, suffered mood swings and anxiety, and would grow up without him at graduations or a wedding aisle. The case serves as a sobering warning. First, unresolved domestic disputes can turn lethal if left unchecked. Second, ignoring signs of severe mental health decline only increases the risk of tragedy. Third, firearms in unstable homes dramatically magnify the chance of irreversible outcomes. The Ebony Smith case forces us to reflect on one truth: sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers on the street, but from the people we once trusted to love us most. Number 6. Stacey Morgan Schoeck. On Valentine's Day, a man expecting a romantic evening with his wife instead walked into an ambush that ended his life, leaving investigators to untangle a murder plot born of betrayal. Stacey Morgan Schoeck, born in 1974, was 35 when she masterminded the killing of her 5th husband, Richard Schoeck. Richard, in his mid-40s, was a facilities manager, Auburn graduate, and a devoted Scout volunteer, remembered for his love of motorcycles and hot air balloons. To friends, he seemed happily married, but Stacey later confessed she wanted him dead, fearing divorce, losing custody of her children, and motivated by life insurance policies totaling more than $500,000. On February 14, 2010, Richard drove to Belton Bridge Park in Hall County, Georgia, for what he believed was a Valentine's Day rendezvous with his wife. Instead, he was ambushed and shot 5 times by Reginald Coleman, a hitman Stacey had hired through her coworker Lenitra Ross. The gunfire was brutal. 2 bullets struck his face at close range, penetrating brain and spinal cord, ensuring he had never had a chance, prosecutors said. Minutes later, Stacey dialed 911, feigning horror as she reported finding her husband dead. The investigation quickly unraveled her deception. Detectives linked Coleman and Ross to Stacey through cell phone records, tire tracks traced to Stacey's borrowed Impala, and financial transactions showing she paid Ross $10,000. Witnesses recalled her trying to sell the car used in the crime just days later. Within months, Stacey, Ross, and Coleman were arrested. As the case went to trial, Stacey became the state's key witness against her co-conspirators. In May 2012, she admitted her role, chillingly telling jurors, "I said I was going to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And that's what I did. And that's disgustingly awful." Ross received life without parole in August 2012. Coleman accepted a plea in November, also earning life without parole. Finally, on December 3, 2012, Stacey pleaded guilty to malice murder. 2 days later, she was sentenced to life without parole by Judge Jason Deal, who emphasized the sordidly premeditated nature of the crime. In court, Stacey appeared subdued, avoiding the eyes of Richard's family as they filled the room in grief. The community response was harsh. Richard's sister, Carole Fillingham, called Stacey a cowardly woman who betrayed trust and questioned, "What did Richard ever do to you?" Prosecutors described the killing as heinous, while friends and co-workers remembered Richard as a man who deserved far better. His family later gathered on what would have been his 50th birthday, vowing he will never be forgotten. From this tragedy come hard lessons. Jealousy and fear, if left unchecked, can fester into deadly intentions. Financial motives often lie hidden behind sudden violence. And trust in intimate partners should never blind us to warning signs of manipulation. The murder of Richard Schoeck remains a grim reminder. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not a stranger in the dark, but the person who promises to love you forever. Number 7. Michelle Reynolds. At the heart of a small Georgia community, where church life seemed to bind families together, a murder would expose betrayal so deep it shook the congregation to its core. Michelle Sullins Reynolds, born in 1969, appeared to live a life built on faith. She was the wife of Thad Reynolds, a 36-year-old church deacon and marriage counselor at Hollywood Baptist Church. To their 4 daughters and neighbors, the couple were childhood sweethearts who had married, divorced, remarried, and built a family anchored in ministry. Yet, behind the hymns and Sunday sermons, Michelle had begun a secret affair with Scott Harper, the church's youth minister. By 2004, the affair turned into obsession. Michelle and Harper whispered about a future together, even darkly joking about ways to remove their spouses. Investigators later revealed how conversations escalated. At one point, Michelle allegedly told Harper that if he wanted her as his bride, he would just have to outlive Thad. They imagined slipping poison into food or clogging arteries with butter, but fantasy gave way to planning. On July 1st, Harper bought a hunting knife from Kmart. Days later, the 4th of July picnic brought both families together, laughter echoing across the field as Michelle and Harper kept their secret. But hours after the holiday, on July 5th, Thad Reynolds was at his workplace, the Frito-Lay distribution center in Rome. There, Harper ambushed him, reportedly saying, "I want what you got," before stabbing him 19 times. A co-worker discovered the body at dawn. Blood covered the floor, the brutality leaving investigators stunned. Emails revealed chilling coordination. Harper had written, "I'm ready for tomorrow. Stop me if you have any hesitation." Michelle's reply sealed the plan, "No hesitation. Be careful. I want to be your wife." Police arrested both Michelle and Harper on July 8th. Prosecutors filed for the death penalty, describing the crime as one of the most shocking conspiracies in Floyd County history. The years that followed were filled with legal maneuvers. Harper eventually pleaded guilty in 2008 to avoid execution, admitting Michelle had provided her husband's schedule and encouraged him to act. In January 2010, Michelle entered a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter and burglary. Judge J. Bryant Durham sentenced her to 20 years in prison. In court, Michelle stood pale and expressionless, her shoulders hunched as the sentence was read. District Attorney Lee Patterson told reporters she was the brains behind this murder plot. Thad's family was devastated. His mother, Kitty Walker, wept openly, asking, "Why? Why not just walk away?" Their priority became protecting the 4 daughters. They supported the plea deal to spare them further trauma and vowed to fight any future parole attempts. The lessons are stark. Obsession mixed with secrecy can breed catastrophic betrayal. Words, even disguised as jokes, can signal deadly intent. And faith communities, though sacred, are not immune to human weakness and manipulation. The murder of Thad Reynolds endures as a grim warning. Sometimes the gravest danger is not from enemies outside but from the person sharing your home and your prayers. Number 8. Pamela Carole Moss. In Georgia's quiet suburbs, beneath a polished image of education and charm, a woman's life unraveled into a pattern of death, deceit, and betrayal that would shock an entire community. Her name was Pamela Carole Moss, born in 1957 in Rome, Georgia. A gifted student with a psychology degree, she appeared destined for a respectable career. But behind her bright persona lay a darker nature. In 1997, Moss pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in her mother's death after prosecutors uncovered forged prescriptions and life insurance fraud. She served 8 years in prison and was released in 2005. Locals began calling her the Black Widow of Macon. Years later, tragedy struck again when her husband Gene Moss died suddenly in 2011. Though Pamela claimed he suffered a stroke, his cremation without autopsy raised suspicions. Still, no charges followed. It was not until 2012 that her past caught up to her in the most brutal way. Doug Coker, a respected businessman and philanthropist, had loaned Pamela $85,000 to fund what she described as a nonprofit project. By March 2012, he realized the money was gone. Emails revealed his frustration, and he warned he would go to law enforcement. On March 13th, Doug met Pamela at a McDonald's in Macon. Minutes later, phone records and testimony showed he was lured to her home. Investigators believe Pamela struck him at least 5 times in the head with a hammer. She then staged phone calls from his cell phone to create confusion, abandoned his car, and returned home to clean. Over 200 bloodstains were later discovered, partially covered with paint and bleach. She even attempted to fill her house with gas, apparently hoping for an explosion to erase evidence. On March 18th, police discovered Doug's body under her porch, wrapped in a tarp with lime and shingles scattered over him. The gruesome discovery ended the mystery of his disappearance. At trial in 2013, Pamela's defense argued she suffered from dissociative identity disorder, claiming an alter ego named Caroline committed the killing. Psychologists testified to the diagnosis, but prosecutors dismissed it as pure garbage. District Attorney Fred Bright told jurors she flim-flammed this man out of money. She lured him to her home and killed him. The jury deliberated for just 30 minutes. Pamela Moss was found guilty of murder. Judge Trent Brown sentenced her to life without parole, telling her, "This court finds you intelligent, manipulating, and calculating." In the courtroom, Doug's wife Judy stared directly at Moss and declared, "I think you are evil." From this case, lessons stand clear. Financial predators often hide behind charm and false promises. Cover stories can mask calculated crimes until evidence tells the truth. And trust, when misplaced, can become a fatal vulnerability. The story of Pamela Moss endures as a reminder, behind a polished exterior, unchecked greed and deception can turn lethal, and justice, though delayed, will ultimately prevail. Number 9. Martha and Johnson. In Georgia, 4 young lives ended under circumstances so chilling that even seasoned investigators were left disturbed. What initially looked like medical tragedy slowly unraveled into a pattern of death and deception. The woman at the center was Martha Ann Johnson, born in 1955, later known by the name Martha Ann Bowen. By the age of just 22, she had already been married 3 times, raising children from each marriage. But behind the ordinary face of a mother, prosecutors alleged a serial pattern of murder. Between 1977 and 1982, 4 of Johnson's children died in her care. Each death was attributed to natural causes at the time, sudden infant death syndrome or seizures, but the timing raised suspicions. Investigators later determined each tragedy followed heated marital disputes between Johnson and her 3rd husband, Earl Bowen. The first death came on September 25, 1977. 23-month-old James Taylor was pronounced dead after his mother claimed she found him unresponsive. Doctors listed it as SIDS. 3 years later, another infant, 3-month-old Tabitha Bowen, died under nearly identical circumstances. Her father, Bowen, openly doubted the explanation, but authorities accepted it. By February 1981, 2-year-old Earl Wayne Bowen died after ingesting rat poison and suffering seizures. Doctors attributed it to an unknown disorder. Days after another marital quarrel, the most disturbing death occurred, 11-year-old Jenny Ann Wright. Paramedics found her face down with foam at her mouth. The autopsy pointed to asphyxiation. Even then, prosecutors hesitated, and Johnson was never charged. It wasn't until 1988, when journalists from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reopened questions, that momentum built. Experts began reconsidering earlier findings. In 1989, a doctor who had once certified James Taylor's death as SIDS admitted there was now a 90% chance it was homicide. On July 3, 1989, police arrested Johnson. In a taped confession, she admitted to killing James Taylor and Jenny Ann Wright, claiming she smothered them by rolling her 250-pound body on top of them as they slept. She chillingly explained the motive, to punish or manipulate her husband. Prosecutors later charged her with the deaths of 2 more children. At trial, Johnson retracted her confession, but jurors still saw the videotape. A statistician testified about the improbability of 4 SIDS cases in one family. Prosecutors pointed to the repeated timing after marital disputes as damning evidence. On May 5, 1990, a Clayton County jury convicted her of murder. She was initially sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. In court, her husband Charles Johnson called her a good wife and mother, while the judge described her as manipulative and calculating. Victims' relatives, including Jenny Ann's half-brother Shane Wright, pleaded against her eventual parole, calling her a danger to society. From this case, hard lessons emerge. Tragedy after tragedy in one household should never be dismissed without thorough investigation. Emotional manipulation can escalate into violence, and trusting without scrutiny can enable catastrophic abuse. Ultimately, the case of Martha Ann Johnson is a haunting reminder. Sometimes the most dangerous threats to children are not strangers, but those who live inside the home. Number 10. Dionne Andrea Baugh. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect life of success and wealth. But behind closed doors, hidden passions and betrayal set the stage for murder. Lance Herndon, a 41-year-old millionaire, software consultant, and founder of Access Incorporated, the firm credited with developing Fulton County's 911 system. Known as a charismatic entrepreneur and ladies' man, he moved easily among politicians and business leaders. But in August 1996, his life ended in a violent attack that left investigators unraveling a web of jealousy, power, and betrayal. The woman at the center was Andrea Baugh, a 27-year-old naturalized American originally from Jamaica. At the time, she was married to an airline pilot living abroad, raising a young daughter in Georgia, and studying finance while working as an executive secretary. Attractive and ambitious, she had developed a reputation for pursuing luxury, and prosecutors argued she saw in Herndon a ticket to that lifestyle. Their relationship began at Herndon's birthday party in April 1996. Within months, he had showered her with gifts, a Mercedes, access to credit cards, and attention. But Herndon's pattern of dating other women soon brought tension. On July 10, 1996, Baugh was arrested after pounding on his door in a jealous rage, catching him with another woman. Herndon bailed her out and promised to help dismiss the charge. Yet he was also seeking to end the relationship. On August 8, 1996, Herndon failed to show up at work. His mother discovered his body the next morning, partially covered with a sheet, his skull crushed by repeated blows from what investigators believed was a crescent wrench. There was no forced entry, and alarm clocks were mysteriously unplugged, one frozen at 4:10 a.m. Prosecutors theorized that Baugh, furious over his distancing and fearful he might not support her in court, attacked him after a night together. Evidence soon mounted. DNA under Herndon's fingernails matched Baugh, as did hairs found on his body. His IBM ThinkPad was recovered in her possession. Most damning, she used his credit card hours after his death to purchase a $3,000 furniture piece under the name Dionne Herndon. Arrested in 1998, Baugh faced charges of murder, theft, and credit card fraud. Her first trial in 2001 ended in conviction on all counts, but the Georgia Supreme Court overturned it in 2003 due to inadmissible hearsay testimony. A second trial resulted in a hung jury. Finally, in 2004, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, receiving a 10-year prison sentence and 10 years probation. As Judge Roland Barnes handed down her sentence, Herndon's mother described her son as the man who gave so much to Atlanta, while prosecutors called the killing a crime of jealousy and greed. Baugh, head lowered, remained largely expressionless. From this case, 3 warnings emerge. Passion mixed with financial dependency can become deadly. Emotional instability must never be ignored when red flags appear. And even in relationships built on wealth and charm, deception can mask danger. Herndon's death reminds us of a sobering truth: ambition and desire, when entangled with betrayal, can turn intimacy into lethal violence. Evil rarely looks like a monster. Sometimes, it wears the face of a mother, a neighbor, or a lover. From betrayal to greed, from obsession to cold calculation, these Georgia women revealed just how dangerous trust can be when placed in the wrong hands. And yet, these are only a fraction of the stories hidden in America's true crime history. Which case shocked you the most, and which warning will stay with you tonight? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to be the first to uncover the next chilling story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Justice Reversed will be back soon with more.